Creative engagement, is it for us? Or is it for God? This week we asked you about risks you've taken in speaking or worship to engage your church. Let's dive into your answers. Have you ever taken an intentional risk with engagement? 0% of you said no. I'm happy to hear that. 11% of you said all the time. 89% of you said yes. Good job. We asked you, is being intentional with engagement worth the risk? 44% of you said yes. People need new stimulation. 44% of you said maybe. Really needs to be fine-tuned and planned. 11% of you said no. People love routine. We asked you, give us an example of a time you crashed and burned taking a risk. There are a few answers. Here are our two favorites. One person said, hey, I tagged I Love You, Lord on the back of the song. It was kind of spontaneous and I'm not good with timing, so it did not work very well. We've definitely been there. One person said they tried popcorn in a service to engage their audience. Maybe it was like a movie theme or something like that. And they said that the sound and the mess was absolutely bonkers. Sound, I guess, being people eating the popcorn? I'm not really sure. Ever tried something that should have failed but didn't? These are two of our favorites. We had a service where we washed people's feet. It led to baptisms and salvations. That's awesome. There's another guy who said, we don't usually do this, but we asked our congregation to come all the way to the front and it worked really well. People were really engaged in worship. We asked, is creative engagement more about us or God? This one had a spelling error on it, and one person said, I reject the premise of the question. No worries. One person said, trying to find ways to engage people is a form of feeding God's sheep, and it honors him. The second person said, it kind of depends on what the motivation is. They've seen people do things like spontaneous worship, and the whole purpose of spontaneous worship is to engage with the Spirit. They were saying that more or less they've seen it done where that really wasn't the end goal. It wasn't the motive. It was just to kind of feel cool or to do what everybody else is doing, and that was definitely more about people. It didn't seem to really honor the Lord. Lastly, we asked, is there a creative engagement that's really stuck with you throughout your life? There were three answers that we wanted to list. One person said, hey, in a service that I was in, we played 3 songs and then the whole church kind of just had the opportunity to read random scripture, and it was incredibly powerful. It's always stuck with me. One of mine, I was in Michigan, I was at a conference, and a guy named Bob Sorge was speaking. He had just written a book called Next Wave, and then Bob asked the worship band to stop playing. Hey, I just want us as people to carry God's presence for a moment. And for truly the next 45 minutes or so, different people in the audience just started singing a song, and the whole audience started singing with them. And it was very spiritually moving. The Lord was really speaking through the songs he was pulling out of people. It was truly a cool thing to be a part of. Now, some of you guys are going to check out at this point. I wanted to give you the psychology behind routine and why change-ups matter. Psychology tells us that there's 3 reasons why people really like routine. Well, number 1, it reduces cognitive load. Did you know that our brains are constantly burning calories, and when we're trying to adjust to new stimulus, there's a lot going on. And so our brains are consuming more calories. Our brains are constantly trying to figure out ways to not do that. So routine is one of the byproducts of our brains basically saying, if I have a stable environment, then I don't have to try to figure so many things out. Number 2, it kind of scratches an itch we have as people for safety and security. When we know what to expect, we know that we're safe and thus we're secure. And the third reason is something called the mere exposure effect. Familiarity breeds comfort. When we're familiar with a surrounding or with what to expect, we have some sort of thing that's kind of innate in us that says, hey, you can get comfortable here because you can trust this environment. Are there any negative consequences to routines? The answer is yes. There's 2 big things that happen as a result of routines. Number 1 is something called the repetition effect. The repetition effect happens when something is repeated too often and it loses its meaning. Because it happens so many times, it's like hearing a joke 10 times. You might laugh the first time, maybe even the second time, but by the 10th time you've heard it, it's lost what its intention is because of the repetition effect. Other thing is called filtering. Our brain starts skimming through things that happen a lot and basically filtering out stuff that becomes irrelevant. So if I've heard this a million times, then I don't need to keep listening because it's not relevant. I've already heard it. I already understand it. I know what I'm in for. And so essentially routine can create disengagement because of those two effects, repetition effect and filtering effect. So we want to answer the big question, who is creative engagement for? If you read Psalms 96, David advocates sing a new song to the Lord. And then if you read the whole rest of the chapter, it's him provoking Israel to testify about how God has changed their lives. Is our constant change of engagement because God needs us to engage him in new ways? I don't think so. I think what David is at least saying here is that God engages with us in so many ways that our testimony needs to reflect that. And so with us, when we try to provoke our congregation creatively to engage, it's a similar thing. Our big goal is to engage people to worship the Lord. And just like David, I think it's really important for us to figure out if there are any stale things that we're doing that are just completely unengaging. Let's substitute those things out and advocate for people to use different experiences in different ways to glorify and worship and obey Jesus. I know this is a long video. How can we do that? There's 3 ways. James 1 verse 5, it says this: if we ask for wisdom, God gives it liberally. So number 1, ask the Spirit. Sit down with the Lord, pray with him. Ask him, how should I engage my church? Number 2, what's the least engaging part of what you do right now? Sub that out, get rid of it. If it's not engaging people, there's no reason for us to have it because our end game is to bring people to God's presence. Number 3, ask yourself, is there a new element that will accomplish engagement? Listen, God, I don't think I did a great job articulating what David did in Psalms 96, what David advocates for in Psalms 96, but I want to encourage you, God is constantly engaging us. God is constantly engaging us in ways that are worthy of us giving him our testimony and testifying about his greatness and glory and life-changingness, is that a word, that he does for us. So let's find ways as worship leaders and pastors to provoke our congregation into reflecting that to him. If we can engage our congregation, they can engage with the Lord. By the way, they don't even need us. Our jobs are simply to be pastors bridging a gap and worship leaders bringing engagement, bringing people into the Lord's presence. So first up, I'm really grateful for your answers. We love hearing those every single week. Thanks so much for engaging with us. But 2, we're praying for you guys. We're really grateful that you're in your communities trying to connect people to engage with the Lord. So we're grateful for you guys. We're praying for you this week. May this build better culture on and off the stage, inside and outside of church. Here's to a great weekend ahead.